Pokemon Journeys had a big problem that Horizons thankfully fixed, and I noticed it when watching the recent Pokemon Horizons episodes. Back when Pokemon Journeys came out, it was obvious that the creators were trying to do something new for the anime. However, it was their first, or perhaps second, go at this new formula after having followed the same system for 2 decades already. They got rid of the typical Ash plus friends exploring in a new region, gathering gym badges as they go on a journey, dealing with evil teams, etc. For Pokemon Journeys' approach to have a hub where Ash and friends would reside at, while going on random excursions as Ash gets closer to the Pokemon World Championships, and go closer to catching every Pokemon, all the way to Mew. So what did Pokemon Horizons fix? And why didn't I mention Sun and Moon technically being the first season that had actually made this change? Let's get into that. First, let's figure out the problem with Pokemon Journeys. When comparing Journeys to the original series, on the surface, it looks like they just repainted the same formula. You got Ash with friends traveling around towards their goals, so what could be so different that it could actually be a problem? Well, Pokemon Journeys' concept wasn't bad, as I'll explain later with Pokemon Horizons, but its execution of it unfortunately failed. And this isn't to say Pokemon Journeys is bad or anything like that. I just think that it could have been far more enjoyable if it simply didn't make this mistake. That mistake being its handling of the overarching story. When you see most of the anime's franchise, you see the goal and you see Ash get closer to that. This is represented by the badges, growth and battle prowess, and traversal of the map. All of this, except perhaps one, is lost in Journeys. First off, Ash's battle prowess was incredibly hard to understand throughout. We rarely saw his training except a few notable times, but those training moments, like with Farfetch'd, made it seem like he was getting a lot weaker actually than he really was. There was never really a moment where you could tell Ash was getting significantly stronger, and if it was there, I just never noticed it, I guess. Before we get onto the biggest offender of this, I do think the badges problem was rectified in the tournament ranking. However, I do feel like they rushed that quite a bit, that I can never get a proper handle on where Ash actually is in the championships compared to other people. And with Go, his goal of catching every Pokemon to Mew was all the more hard to gauge. It's such a lofty goal with no real clear path, other than catching willy-nilly. Which led into the biggest issue, the traversal of the map. Now, I'll get into how Sun and Moon and Horizons don't have this issue in a moment. But because the goal had no one approach, the creators of the anime decided to make every episode pretty much their own extremely self-contained story with absolutely no connection or sense of progress with them. One episode, for example episode 64, they are in Hoenn helping people at a hot spring, to episode 65 in Unova battling old friend, to episode 66 being in Kanto going to Kalos to help Flabebe find a flower in the next episode. Now these episodes were fine on their own, with some real highlights, especially in the second year if I'm not mistaken, episode 87. There were also some short story arcs, 89 to 90, that helped its case, but that doesn't distract from the overarching story problem. There was no sense of progress, which gives question to what's the point in watching this anyways. Maybe wondering about Project Mew, which I definitely think helped, but it was still very unclear. Exactly how was it helping them find Mew? That's a question I never got answered. Therefore, there was still a lack of story progress. It was the most episodic Pokemon had ever been. How does that change from, let's say, Sun and Moon? Well, Sun and Moon doesn't have this problem because it never tried to take on such lofty goals with its story. It made it very clear what it was from the beginning, which may not be for everyone, but it handled what it wanted to do well. It didn't need that original series formula that, for at least what it felt like, Journeys was trying to use. The entire idea was never to become a champion, because there was no league at the start. Rather, the goal was to understand island life in Alola, which gave room for any story they wanted that represented this idea. I would say that the beginning of it, however, fell a bit flat because it did run into the problem of no tangible goal. However, they fixed this mid-season by including the island trials, and once that was complete, there was the league. Not to mention overarching stories such as Poipos, calming the Ultra Beast, getting stronger to beat the Guardian of Melamela Island, helping Lily's fear of Pokemon, and more. And they were all really iconic stories. They kept it to short story arcs throughout, which helped the pace of the series, differentiating it from Journeys, which occasionally added in story arcs, but it would be randomly introduced and just put to rest in like 2 to 3 episodes. Pokemon Sun and Moon was just so different that it can't be compared to Journeys. So we clarified Journeys' big problem, and the difference between it and Sun and Moon. That leaves the final question. How did Pokemon Horizons fix that? Well, Pokemon Horizons took the same concept of traveling all over with no promise of consistency, and added a proper story to it. Unlike Journeys, who would finish a new story as soon as possible, Pokemon Horizons has been working towards a goal while having the flexibility of Journeys. They can go wherever the writers want, and have as much filler as they want. but it's going towards the goal of finding clues towards the mystery of Rakua. As long as the story goes in that direction, they cover the guidelines I said earlier. The two main characters are constantly growing as trainers, they are progressing through a map, though unconventionally. The Titan-like Pokemon can also be seen as a sort of badge system, as they are constantly getting closer to their goals. While I personally do like Journeys, I feel like Horizon just improves on its formula tenfold, allowing me to appreciate what the original concept of Journeys was. I'm glad they are able to grow from that, and it serves as a lesson for all of us. Making mistakes towards your goal, being their formula for the anime, is always fine, as long as we can learn from them and move on. Then it's extremely valuable, and we should never forget that. And if you'd like me to hear my overview of Pokemon Horizons' first few episodes, watch this. Thank you guys so much for watching.